Okay, looks like we are now live. Thank you for everyone joining the webinar of State of AI Development Tools. I have Gautam with me, one of our co-founders and engineers, and I also have Daniel, who one of our guests today, who's a co-founder of Gentrace. For those of you who don't know who Gentrace is, it's the LML evaluation platform for testing generative AI across teams and automating evals for reliable LLM products. And they've raised the Series A, and they work with a lot of large customers that you may have heard of. I'm not sure if I can say the customers' names here, but Daniel previously managed and released CI/CD and test infrastructure for Uber and Dropbox, where it scaled to millions of users. And before that, he graduated from Stanford, along with some of his co-founders. A question I want to pose to the audience during this discussion today is, when working with the AI development tools, what's the biggest challenges you've faced? And are there any tools you've recently tried that surprised you, either negatively or positively? I'll post these questions in the chat. First question for our guests here today. You guys both work at AI companies. Tell us a little bit about some of the tools, AI tools that you're using every day.
I can go first.
Go ahead.
I think a lot of folks use Cursor. I use Cursor as well. I also use our own AI tool, Jimmy, which is like an agentic AI for more complex end-to-end tasks, like an agentic AI tool. And apart from that, we also use a bunch of like stuff in CI for like code review and stuff like that. But those are the main kind of daily drivers for me. Daniel?
For me, also for our team, speaking on our behalf of the team, definitely I'll say 100% without a doubt, Cursor is life-changing. Very fascinating to see the fast follow of companies in that space and how that's getting disrupted. Let's talk less about code gen. It's a bit boring because that's obvious and everyone does it. Customer support is also pretty boring because everyone's doing it. So it's an obvious problem. One company that I'm personally using every single day that I don't know if I'll ever get off until there's a better tool is Rewind, recording, OCRing my whole screen. And that's not the AI part. Obviously, there's some ML piece to OCR aspect of recording your screen. But they also have like what they call ChatGPT for Me, where you could search across your whole archive of OCR'd, saved, archived information of your screen so that you could search for particular keywords that you've forgotten in the past. Maybe you could pull up that Zoom call that you had. Might sound creepy, but it's basically like Gong. Or you forgot that notepad that you wrote somewhere in one of those apps, whether it's Notion or Stickies or Notes, Apple Notes. Being able to search back on that is really helpful. I also have OCD and ADHD, and I forget, and I have short-term memory, so it's pretty easy to go back on certain slides of my past. So that's Rewind. It's now called Limitless, by the way. They rebranded. I'll stop right there. A lot of other AI tools that I'm using, they're actually very value additive. And I'm very excited about where else LLMs will disrupt past code gen and support and marketing copy.
You've definitely given me a list that I need to go review now. I feel like there's so many I didn't even recognize that you had it off, gave off. So those are interesting. I'll definitely have to take a look.
Yeah.
So first off, like, how would you guys both describe the current state of AI for development tools? Like, what are some major trends you're seeing in the industry right now? Yeah, Adam, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Daniel mentioned this a little bit about CodeGen. I think when I was at Uber, we just started using Copilot. We had access to it very early on with a lot of like legal approvals and stuff. And CodeGen was kind of really big back then. Like you would autocomplete. Had some benefit. Surprisingly, it was not that much because the completions were very small. Now that's gotten a little bit better with like more rich predictions with Cursor and stuff. But the new age of like coding tools is more agentic. So more than just code completion, I think these tools are now going to the entire software development lifecycle. In my experience at working at large companies, coding is usually not the bottleneck for delivering software. It's like the planning phase, like the collaboration, the software delivery, like getting it out there, testing, QA. There's so many more pieces that need to go in. And I think there's some very exciting verticals for AI agents to kind of like be part of that entire developer workflow rather than just be inside the IDE. So I'm pretty excited for those aspects as well.
Yeah, I would tail off of that, but like I'm like taking a step back and look at the macro level. This is actually like everyone knows the most exciting thing ever, the most consequential thing on earth right now. I think more so than what people think, because some people out there compare this to like the Web3 wave. Not all like that, because not only will it not dip because it's actually value additive and actually creating value to the world. It's also way bigger than everyone thinks. I think everyone's undervaluing every single idea, every single vertical that's being disrupted, and because we've been like, what's the word? We've been whiplashed from mistakes of other trends in the past. This is far bigger than mobile and internet. So I think I'm speaking to the choir there. But as a result, the areas that I'm very excited to watch from afar, and also as a vendor, as an infrastructure tool support over time, are spaces that have not been tapped. So I think that multimodal has not had its moment. It will. I think models like Gemini is actually really good for that if you tried it out. Voice is starting to blow up. I think it's going to get bigger. Video has not really blown up. It's just Sora or other tools from foundation models. There has to be more companies that will leverage this besides Runway ML. A couple. I think my co-founder actually has a thesis or a hypothesis that there will be the revenge of like fine tuning that will come back, because enterprises will not move as fast as AI native startups like Gitar, and they will end up thinking about how to be compliant and focused on vertical specific use cases. And the only best way to do that in a reliable way is to pay expensive fine-tuned model iterations to get their outcomes better for their particular customers who are really large, because you're talking about enterprise customers selling for enterprise customers. So those are the areas that I am super excited to see where it would go. If I had the time and money to invest in more of these type of startups, I would do that right now.
Yeah, just to add into that, the multimodal thing, I think I saw a thread on Twitter about someone who's trying to debug an issue with Gemini, and Gemini asked them, "Can I hop on a video call with you, share your screen?" And it helped them debug. That's like a really cool example of like an agent that's not just like inside your ID, but kind of transcends outside of that space and kind of like helps you debug like a pair programming sort of thing. I'm pretty excited about some new use cases like that.
Definitely. I think, for example, e-commerce and companies like DoorDash, Instacart, Uber Eats, there has to be some disruption there with multimodal.
Great takes. My next question, this is probably more so for Gautam. What limits are you or a team seeing using AI for development tools, especially when dealing with large, complex code bases?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think we work with a lot of companies which have like really large enterprise scale code bases. So like 50 million lines of code, 100 million lines of code. We usually see like things breaking down when your change has to span like more than a few files. A lot of the tools in the market today are focused on like, hey, you can have up to like some amount of context and some amount of change. That's where I think the true disruption is going to happen, because most enterprises, the amount of complexity kind of alluding back to the fine tuning. The reason why they do it is because there's just so much noise and so much legacy in those large code bases that you may not actually get like fresh, good context when you are working with making code changes or any agentic flows. That's where I think we kind of see a lot of these tools start showing their cracks. Great for prototyping new things, but usually working with existing code bases has been a challenge. Like even when I'm working with Cursor, sometimes when I'm debugging, it can take a lot of attempts before, because it's not really like deterministic. Kind of have to like make it understand exactly what I'm trying to say, and it could be like an art almost of someone trying to like make the tool bend to your will. We're not there yet in terms of the interactive model being like very intuitive for someone, but I think For new projects, it's getting really good, but I'm waiting to see, like, for larger projects, it's still a challenge, I would say.
Interesting. And so, Daniel, I think next question really hit on some of the space and some of the work that you're doing. But how do you evaluate new tools to use in terms of performance and accuracy?
Yeah, and when you say evaluate, you mean evaluate the outputs, not like evaluate a tool to use, correct?
Yes. And like, I think with the outputs, you'll know if it's still worth using too.
Yeah, so our product, what Gentrace does is we help test for the quality, safety, and compliance and so on of your generative AI by running test cases, synthetic data against your AI product, that then the output gets evaluated by certain evaluators that we offer, whether it's LLM as a judge, heuristics, or human annotation. Generally, customers like to combine all kinds of these in a diverse way. Don't worry about me. I mean, you don't have to worry about me sharing customers, but we do work with customers like Walmart and Asana and Quizlet, so they have a lot of volume. It's important to understand that they do have a ton going on, and they are working at scale. These types of customers have a ton of high needs around security and making sure that things don't regress and being performant, while also making the AI actually useful. These two paradigms are important to solve. As a result, we sell the fear, right? The fear of regressing from trying out these tools, but also the fear that the quality is not on par with other AI tools that are getting better out there right now. So it's a race to actually deploy these almost as if it's existential for these customers. For products like Gitar or Cursor or any of these cogen tools, it's the same thing where you ideally, before you ship anything to production, you want to test these things rigorously to make sure that when you're generating code outputs, whether it's autocomplete or leveraging context to apply into an agentic output for self-reasoning capabilities, you want to make sure that they are self-reasoning properly. You want to make sure that the autocomplete is actually providing really good outputs, because if they don't, you will frustrate the developer and they will quit using your product. There's that joke right now where Cursor, this is tagline that's being tweeted around where it's like something like AI, or Cursor, this is still not working, or this needs to be fixed, and then the person has to do this like 8 times over, and it's still not fixed, right? Because it can't self-reason itself. That's a bad experience. Of course, it's actually pretty good on other normal non-edge case use cases like boilerplate code or other things that are redundant. But for the specific types of code gen that is harder to solve, maybe an agent can't solve that well, the best thing to do is to roll back that particular use case before you ship it and frustrate the engineer, right? And so we can help test that out, identify that, and make sure that you have a better experience for your customers through your product. By the way, one other thing that is exciting for our product that we're starting to focus a lot more on is supporting agents purposely, a purpose-built solution to evaluate agents. One of the problems that agentic companies and AI native companies have is every step of an agent output is so foundational, is so important, that they actually need a golden test suite for every step along the way. Like maybe the step 2 or step 5 is more important than step 3 or 4. Maybe step 8 is more important than the foundational base step, which is step 1. You won't really, you don't know, like all of these different companies have different requirements and different needs. And as a result, you need a tool like ours to be able to holistically and comprehensively test every step and do all these kinds of permutations along the way to ensure that every output is good along the way. I know that for non-code gen type products like Bolt or what was the other one? Lovable. These tools, like when you try them out, they think on their own. Obviously, they're self-reason, but at step 4, it breaks. Then it has this pop-up that says, would you like to fix this now, right? It actually says, something is not right here. What would you like me to do? Fix now. Oftentimes you have to click fix now like 5 times, right? And you're going to frustrate the user. So those are the times where you need to test that stuff out and probably just roll that back or stop it from happening. And we can help you with that step of the user experience.
That's very crucial, I think, for high quality, especially like for not breaking trust with developers, because there's so many tools, like everyone's trying so many new tools, because it's the barrier to like adopt something is so low now. It's very easy to just like get started. So that's a big challenge as well.
I would actually, if I may chime in, ramble a little bit more. The barrier to entry is so low, and the expectation is so high, to the point where now users have high, like unreasonably, like exponentially high expectations, because people are landing lazier and they have short attention span. So the moment you break, you really only sometimes get one shot. You need to create the aha moment. The time to value needs to be really short. So the moment you break, you can actually lose that customer. So that's why you need to test this out rigorously. The best companies so far that have grown like crazy and gotten to 20 million ARR in 2 months are the ones that have been able to solve the low-hanging fruits to create the aha moment as fast as possible, and then focus on the more complex stuff later. So like for code gen, I think it's not as close to say like SQL generation, but it is pretty close, because if you're generating code that doesn't work, what's the point of having AI do it? You might as well just debug it yourself. Same with SQL. If you're gonna create a shitty SQL output, you might as well not use it, because you're gonna have to be a data scientist anyway and debug that yourself, wasting probably more time than just doing it yourself or asking your data science colleague to help you out.
I know you guys both kind of touched on this a little bit, but you both are working at companies that build tools for other developers. What are you hearing from your customers the most? Like some pain points or some what's working well?
Yeah, I can take this one first. I think I mentioned this briefly before. Large code bases are generally a challenge. Even if context lengths are getting bigger, doesn't mean that having more context is actually sometimes bad, because what we've tried, for example, is some tasks we can say, hey, you have like a very large objective with multiple goals to accomplish. And if we stuff everything in one prompt, or like provide a lot of context in one large prompt, it actually tends to hallucinate more, right? Because it tries to take so many different paths that it gets lost. Sometimes actually better to do very specific one small task, which is like very much chopped up. But the problem with doing it that focus is that on large code bases, it's just very super slow. Like even if you parallelize, if you do some sort of like optimizations, it's just not at all scalable. Because traditionally, I think when you wanted to do something like, let's say, a code migration, right, it involves a lot of steps. You first need to understand what are the differences between the previous version of software to a newer version. What are some gotchas? How does it affect your own enterprise wrappers of sorts? And that knowledge is very hard for like a model to have by itself. So even like planning on like a 50 million line code base can take like a really, really long time, right? Like regardless of how you index stuff. And that's where I think a lot of the challenges we've been hearing from our customers is like, hey, the commercial looks great. I tried it and it's not at all what I expected. I think, as Daniel mentioned, the expectations are very high and the aha moment is not there in the enterprise. I think for direct to consumer, like it's there because the use cases are typically more focused and smaller. But for the enterprise, I think it's still like they're struggling. Like there's not many good solutions out there. There's some players like Sourcecraft that have been able to provide some level of success, but it's very hard for technology companies without deep tech to operate in that space. I think that's my take on it.
So I actually have a question for you, because that's actually very fascinating to hear that more code, more context actually makes it hallucinate more. I wonder if that will very drastically change in even a couple weeks or a month here because of the rate of development, because everything is getting so good so fast. Like, have you tried it with Grok? Has it actually
I have not. No,
performed better?
I just saw it came out, but I haven't played with it yet. You might be right that it could change, and context sense can get bigger and bigger. But I think more than the context, it's also about like what part of the context to focus on, right? Like that's something that we'll have to figure out. Like the reasoning capabilities. I mean, just even if you drop someone into like a large code base with no knowledge, they can take like months to like fully ramp up, and they're only working on like a small part of the code base. I remember when I was interning at Microsoft, they put me on like a small sub team on like a much larger piece, and I was like, wow, this is crazy complex because it's like decades old, so much legacy. And the other problem is like these models don't even see so much like uh, maybe like C plus the .NET code. They're probably seeing a lot of like TypeScript and Python, right? So like we've seen this, for example, with some of our customers have like lots of Scala code, and they're like, okay, none of this stuff works on Scala because it's just not enough training data. Right?
Yeah, makes sense.
So let me move on to the future of development AI tools. So my first question is, DeepSeek has come out and made their models open source. What impact do you think this will have on developer tooling?
I believe that it is only net positive. The only thing that's net negative for new models, especially that are open source, are to the foundation models themselves. That's it. Like, yeah, when DeepSeek came out, I bought a shit ton of NVIDIA stock right there. It was so obvious. Like, it's hilarious because the people who sold are probably people on Wall Street. I don't know anything. The issue is that you end up having way more need for GPUs and inference calls. So those are two different parallel streams of trends that are happening in the market. And you're going to need to spend more and more. Obviously, the price will go down over time. So the highest risk there is like the GPU cost will go down, but inference still goes up because it's like that. I forgot what's that called? The paradox of Jevons paradox, where like you like the lower the cost is, the higher the demand is. So you end up using it more, and that's applying for this market. It's a very true statement, and so. As a result, it's actually net new for people like us who are leveraging these tools. You want a competitive atmosphere that's not oligarchy. You want to have multiple models to swap across and test out. You need to use Gentrace to be able to test the different types of model, which one is better, and swap almost immediately on the fly to that better model so that you have the best customer experience. This is so good for the space. Open source is going to be like a way to drive down costs for the application companies like Gitar, so that you can do more for your customers and also sell them at a cheaper price so that they actually use it even more. Therefore, you get more revenue. So open source is a great thing. It's also hilarious because it's not really just about open source. Still, closed source models like Grok are just like coming out with a bang. Actually, I'm not sure. They're closed source, right?
They're close source.
Yeah. Okay, so as I understand, like, and they just took number one on the App Store. Like, it doesn't for the chatbot side. It just doesn't even like open source is just another type of model that comes out that happens to be open source. It doesn't matter which one is open source or closed source. Whatever is best is what matters. So for me, it's like irrelevant of that fact. The more models that are actually competitive out there that comes out, the better it is for developer tools like us.
Yeah, I think like very early days when Copilot came out, I think OpenAI was mostly the only game in town and that people were using. So a lot of the tools were kind of focused on that. But now I think the models are just a commodity, right? Like the layer has become so commoditized that the differentiation is in the application layer. Like you have to think about your user experience, like the product fitting for that particular workflow. Being able to swap is also great for like enterprise use case, because sometimes you don't want to send it to the cloud. You want to host it in your own like VPC or on-prem, and you may not want to host like a 700 billion parameter model, which may not even be required for that use case that you're trying to do for.
Mm-hmm. I also, on that comment, I also believe that reaction that especially is coming from big companies, from enterprise, and we're experiencing ourselves and need to deploy on-prem. I believe that is a short-term thing. It's not enterprise's fault that they had to behave that way. It's part of their regulatory process and compliance needs. But like with any trend, like the internet or mobile, the market is so efficient that eventually you can't help but to use these tools in order to be competitive. It's live or die. You either use it to survive and stay relevant, or you will die out of the need of being compliant. And so eventually everyone will use this. This is too consequential to not be a part of for any company.
Oh, great takes. So many hot takes in here too. So it sounds like overall, you guys are seeing a shift in how foundational models are influencing developer workflows. There's also a lot of hype on these tools replacing engineers. What are your takes on that?
I think it's actually, my take is probably maybe a little contrarian. I think the take has always been like, oh, junior engineers are not going to exist in a few years. I think it's going to be the opposite. I think junior engineers are going to thrive a lot more. I mean, we see this with our junior engineers who are able to like achieve things that I was not able to do when I just came out of college. They're able to like learn new technology stacks much faster. I mean, if you think back in the day, there was like so many different kinds of engineering, right? I mean, not back then, actually, there was only three. For example, there's like a web admin, there was like a backend person, and there was like a DB person. Now there's like data engineer, like there is like a front end, back end, there's like an ML engineer, SRE, and it's going to get more and more complex. And people can't keep everything in their context. But with an LLM and a coding agent or a agentic AI, you can actually like get some superpowers. If you're a good engineer who has knowledge of the system, you don't need to be an expert in mobile or an expert in front end. You would know how your software should behave, and you can use that as like a leverage to have impact, which means that junior engineers who excel in the basics of computer science and the fundamentals will always have maybe like even more impact. I think the danger is usually to more senior people who may not adopt these tools fast enough or might be like resistant to like, hey, could actually help me out. If you adapt, I think it can be really the great equalizer, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't have that many disagreements with Gautam so far, and trust me, if I disagree with you, I'll be blunt. But I am on the same page. I love all these doomsday speakers out there who say this says this and that, because it's my opportunity to buy in some way and actually take advantage of it. It is the most hilarious thing for people to say this stuff. Like, it's the same thing as saying OpenAI was going to be the $1 trillion company that will kill everyone because they're going to AGI. No, that's not going to happen. There's going to be multiple models. Same thing with this. Oh, the engineers is going to be wiped out. No, that's not going to happen. You know what actually happens is it's going to remove all the bad low level, like 1 or 2x engineer. You're going to have the 10 or 20x engineer to survive, right? That's what's happening, because you don't need the low level. It's sad, but it's a reality that like new grads are struggling to find jobs because they can just be outdone by Cursor right now or other tools. So it actually makes the market more efficient, because the only ones that will have jobs are the ones that are actually really good and actually valuable in this world, right? That's actually good for society. That's good for the markets. And so I like that. Like that doesn't. Like these tools will only get better and help amplify these 10x engineers to be the 20x engineers, right? If I have kids right now, I really encourage them, if they want to be in tech, or they want to like be a part of like startup ecosystem and such, I would encourage them to like at least be technical still. It's like silly to say that they will be wiped out suddenly. I had another point and I'm forgetting right now, but I guess the last point is like it's ironic, or it's nonsensical to say that AI, that cogen will take over all engineers, because at that point, if they're so good, then AGI exists and everyone loses their job and the world is in disarray, right? We're in Elysium or something, like the rich people will live in Mars or whatever on the Halo ring. Now we're not at that point. We're not even close to that. So that's a bigger world problem. Currently right now, engineers will still be necessary, and the best engineers will be even more valuable, period.
I love your hot takes, Daniel. These are so great. So for both of you, what's one thing you're most excited about, and give me one thing you're most concerned about when it comes to the future of AI development tools? I know we've hit a lot and we've talked about, but if there's one thing from the discussion or anything you haven't added, Please share.
Yeah, I would say for me, the most exciting thing is we're seeing a maturity of the tools going outside just the IDE and going across the entire developer workflow. I always thought that, hey, why can't I, think of something when I'm on a commute or on the train and say, hey, can you like prototype something for me? I'll get to work and then something's like waiting for me that I can then go play with. There's so many this weird use cases that'll just become possible when you go outside the traditional bounds of Hits where code needs to be written. And then I think the scary possibility is like it's just going to be so fast that I think be hard for folks to like keep up. It's a good thing overall, but it also means that the bar for MVPs is going to get way higher.
Yes.
Right, which means you got to like really. I think I was seeing like this is nothing like when mobile came out. Everyone was like doing mobile apps and stuff, but now it's like even the incumbents are like catching up really fast to adopting these technologies. Like Daniel said, like the bigger companies are like going all in on this stuff. So it's a crazy time. It's actually a very exciting and scary time.
Yeah, I would only disagree in one part, which is that like, yes, while incumbents are going really fast, they're not going fast enough. Like the startups are going way faster, way faster. I mean, we have the list of companies that have hit already 20 million or 50 million in less than 2 years, not even 2 months or 8 months. Like that's not overvalued at that point. Like, I mean, obviously renewal is going to be a problem, and maybe a new startup would just take them over. But that is net. Like, look at all the companies as a market cap. They're actually very valuable. They're not like Web3 before that, like is cyclical, or other ways like I don't know, I can name other stuff that hasn't generated revenue, but this one actually instantly generates revenue. Why would you not want to be a part of this space? The downside from this as a result is the bar for execution as a startup goes way up, like way like 100x up. Before you used to have time, you could just, I don't know, you could do bonding events, you could like host more events, you could think about product ideation and not have to ship today but ship it tomorrow. You know what's happening with these companies is that these are all like, honestly, they're like 20 to 25-year-old new grads that came out of school building this 7 days a week, and they are shipping like crazy. And that is what scares me, because if you don't keep up with that, if you get distracted by other things that don't matter, it's primarily like your engineering team, if you don't like focus on just shipping, you will be left behind. You will be left behind. There is too many startups right now. They all see the same opportunity, that the ones that wins will execute the fastest. And then there's no way the incumbents will beat that. They still have 5 days a week, 9 to 5 jobs. They're not working 7 days a week. It's funny because isn't AI supposed to replace these jobs? No, it actually accelerates them, right? So combined with AI powered tools, and with a cooked team, you're unstoppable. And that's what you need to do as a startup.
That's a nice take.
Yeah, I love how you tie that all together, Daniel. And I think there also somebody said about like so much bureaucracy. As much as some of these older companies try to pull back in the startup mindset, you'll hear founder CEOs of larger companies, and they'll say, "Oh, we're trying to become startup values and so forth." It's just the larger you get, the harder it is to push things through.
Yeah, I mean, we were all at Uber. Crazy times up and down back then. We were one of the fastest growing companies of all time. We made a lot of mistakes, but I knew that you both too were like working crazy hours, late nights. I was, at the time, that was what it took.
Yeah.
Think about that times 5 now. And then being up to date with the latest tools in order to get you to go faster. So the bar got higher.
Absolutely.
Oh, great analogy. Yes, that really hit home for me. Any last thoughts or comments or that you'd like to give us before we go and switch to audience questions? Audience, if you have any more questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A for us. But any last thoughts, Gautam or Daniel?
No, this is great. Thanks for helping steer the conversation. Pretty excited for the future. I think this might look very different 6 months down the line, we might have like a lot more cool stuff to talk about. Like it's just the rate of innovation has just been very crazy last few months.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see in your screen, but I would rather just take questions first before I ramble further. So,
so Matt asked if we can comment on what Thomas, Rudders, and Ross implies for copyright in the LLM for code generation space. Daniel, Gautam, do you have any thoughts?
the question again is, any thoughts on copyright implications in, copywriting implications for, oh, cool.
Generation space, yeah.
On what Thomas Routers versus Ross implies for copyright. I'm actually not familiar with that Thomas Router. Would that person be able to share a bit more detail about that?
I think the case, so from what I know, the case itself is about scraping copyrighted legal materials to train AI-powered legal research tools. Broad reasoning, there's broad reasoning that could apply to AI models and proprietary code bases. The court, I think, largely rejected Ross's argument about scraping and using copyrighted legal materials for training was fair use. So I think that kind of suggests that training AI models or copyrighted software tools.
Absolutely. I think the take here is that if you see like most of the AI tools like cursors or like any of these, like even us, for example, we don't train on customer code. Like that's a given, right? So a lot of the models are now focusing on like training only on permissibly licensed code, which means it's going to be like a very smaller subset, but it's going to be better from like a legal standpoint. Zero data retention is a must for enterprise too, right? Like you don't want to have any sort of like training going on unless you're doing it in-house. That's different, right? So I think that's kind of where the world's heading towards to kind of protect itself. But as Daniel said, it might change in the future based on like how things shake out competition-wise. But yeah, I don't know if there's anything more I can add there. But it seems like the not training part is something that's becoming very standard, and not retaining data is becoming standard, which kind of helps, at least from like a commercial standpoint, to assuage those concerns.
I hope I'm answering the question. I agree where for the startups like us, for example, those are off limits right now. It's like also we're too small of a company to risk having that type of bad relationship with our own customers. We cannot leverage their data to train our own fine-tuned model, for example. This question seems more for foundation models and how they're doing it. Everyone claims OpenAI is doing shady things of trying to get scrape data incorrectly. I really am curious how deep research does things, because they do crawl the web, and I guess they crawl, but they don't use it to train the model back into the foundation model. Same with Grok. I'm very curious to see what they actually do behind the scenes, because the models are so good that they have to come from sources that probably are illegal. If I were to bet, if it is legal, there's a lot of talks about OpenAI's Sam Altman's close relationship with like Reddit, for example. He's a big investor. Yeah. Lots of human authentic output data, and they probably sell to them and sell it at a steep price. I don't know how many other companies are like Reddit out there right now. Maybe Quora. I'm sure Zuckerberg doesn't want to sell Instagram or Meta's data, but that's all valuable. At some point, like I said, the market is efficient. There has to be someone will break and either do it legally or illegally, and then find a way to grab all this data to build the super model. And I have no idea how that's going to pay out, but I do believe it's going to happen. And the means of how, I'm not sure. these founders of these model companies are so ruthless. They are doing whatever it takes to get to AGI. So I wouldn't be surprised if they are infringing on copyright rules. So that's how I think about speaking on behalf of these model providers. I'm not sure. As for startups, off limits, because we do not want to risk breaking the relationship with customers. That's not part of our policy. We're not that big.
And then Matt has another follow-up question. How do we ensure the foundation models do not include things like GPL code that could cause poisoning?
I think that's a good question. I think one of the things that a lot of these code gen companies struggle with, I mean, even Copilot or Cursor, is when you generate code, there is basically no traceability, right? Like, okay, what part of the code that someone put up a PR is human generated versus AI generated? There are ways to like detect some parts of it, but it's hard. It's becoming harder and harder, right? I don't think there's like a straightforward answer to this one. The only answer I've found is usually if you can see the data set, you can guarantee it, right? Like, for example, if you're in an environment where that's absolutely not allowed for some industry for regulation purpose, then you might have to just use like a open source model where the data set is kind of known ahead of time, right? So that way you can like verify that there are no actual samples in there from sources that are GPL or something that's more restrictive. It's also like a very newly developing area. So I think a lot of the laws that we have around copyright and copyleft licenses are still, I don't think, like black and white at this point, because it's like derived data of derived data. Like there's synthetic data that the more capable model is generating that, for example, DeepSeek is using to distill. So would you consider that like direct copy? It's not like very clear. I think the laws probably will have to catch up a little bit and see how. Yeah, I think that's the best answer at this point, I think. And I think if you look at Microsoft, for example, when we did this at Uber, they basically just said, hey, we'll take the liability if something like this happens. So that's how we even got to use Copilot, because most businesses don't want to deal with that liability. So if someone's like guaranteeing that we will take the liability, that's when you actually will be able to use it, right? So and only the really big companies like Microsoft or the model providers can do that potentially.
Yeah, they don't mind paying people off or things off, paying the fines, essentially, any consequences that come along with it. Daniel, did you want to add anything?
No, actually, I don't have any more to add. I agree with that part.
Well, we have 2 minutes left. So any last thoughts from you, Daniel? I know you wanted to hold off on yours. Like, Adam, if you have anything else you want to add.
Oh, I don't have anything necessarily to share, but it's more, I didn't have like a pointed one, but it's more, the sheer excitement for this whole space is unreal. This is actually so consequential. I personally don't think it's a bubble. There is going to be a correction for sure, but this is not a bubble. It's interesting to hear, especially like questions and thoughts around like security and compliance and all that. I think you will see sooner than not that the market is so efficient that there will be more adoption than fear really quickly here. It's already happening, but there is quite a number of exciting, I personally know a lot of exciting agentic companies that are trying to disrupt certain verticals that have not taken off yet, but they will. In either healthcare, it's already happening in legal with Harvey, and Eve is another company. There is other spaces that have not been disrupted, consulting, finance, banking, that at some point, whichever company or whichever solution is the one that takes that leap to try these things out will actually capture a lot of value, and then people won't be able to help but to use them. I also am really excited about fine tuning to help solve a lot of the problems of big companies that are concerned about copywriting and infringement. The only risk there is that you end up stuck with whatever model that you use to fine tune, and you will inevitably use the latest models as well. So this is just like all in all, me thinking that like it's important for everyone to be a part of the space. You really do not want to be left behind. You need to learn how to not just prompt these tools, but also know what tools to use and what it will do to your workflow. And then for anyone who's actually leveraging AI, you need to test it and evaluate it. So you need to use Gentrace in order to do that well. So that's my plug. But everything is all symbiotic and way too exciting to not be a part of. Every single person in every job, in every role, in every function needs to, in my opinion, think about this. You cannot avoid this, and it's too exciting.
Yeah. To your point on security, 2 years, in my past life, I was in the security space, and that was just 2 years ago. And the automatic reaction was absolutely not. This is not going to work for us. It's not secure. And now you can totally see attitudes slowly changing. Not slowly. It's 2 years is not slow. It's been pretty quick, actually, compared to. Well, on that note, thank you both for your time. Thank you for audience for joining us. If you have any questions, feel free to tweet at us at Guitar Code or send us an email at info@Gitar.ai. Daniel, I'll let you give Gentrace's info where they can reach you all at. You can also find us on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thanks, Serena, for having us.